So the first presentation that starts at 11 is how virtual worlds are transforming physical and mental health, and I would like to welcome Jessica Lindl up here to present the rest of her panel.
Oh, it's not. Okay. That was such an exciting entrance. Thanks, everybody. I'll ask my panel to start walking forward. For those of you who are here today, thank you for arriving. There was a little glitch with the app that had us starting at 1 p.m., so I'm glad everyone came at 11 a.m. So we have in conversation today 3 incredible women. First up is Lindsay Watson, who's the co-founder of Augment Therapy. For those of you who don't know, Augment Therapy is an AR experience that supports young people with the physical therapy that they need to do. I think we all have probably been through a physical therapy experience and know how hard it can be. For these young people, many of them have serious diseases like cancer, and she's created an incredibly engaging experience in AR. In addition to that, we have Dr. Joanneke Weerdmeester. Joanneke is a behavioral scientist based out of the Netherlands. She is working with Explore Deep, which is the company behind Deep that I'm sure almost everyone knows. It's a meditative VR experience that initially started off focusing on how to support people with anxiety and is now expanded into many other areas like trauma, PTSD, long COVID, and youth and forensic care. And then finally, Carrie Shaw. Carrie is the CEO and founder of Embodied Labs, which is an immersive caregiving training platform for students, healthcare workforce, and informal caregivers who are caring for the aging population. Just a really incredibly compelling experience on how to learn how to support the people you're caring for by actually walking in their shoes in an immersive experience. So as you can tell, what we're going to be discussing today are innovations that are in the broad digital health and well-being area. So in addition to the experiences we've just described, there's also many, many applications that are happening, like simulations with surgeries that we're doing with Unity, also broad-scale adoption of medical professionals, nurses, doctors who continue receiving their continuing education in game-based applications like Level X, which has a few million active users every single month. So a really broad variety of applications that we're going to cover today. Instead of sitting with our panelists, I'm going to sit at this big podium so everyone can see me. And I hope, can everyone see our 3 panelists here, especially those of you, okay, on the far side. All right, thumbs up in the far corner of the room. Thank you so much. All right, so what I wanted to start off with, and we'll just start here with you, Carrie, and go down, is just initially, how did you get started in this area? What was your kind of personal founding story?
Sure, yeah. Well, hi everyone, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So I'm Carrie, and for me, my kind of first seed for Embodied Labs, unbeknownst to me, started in my teens when my mom got diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease, and she was in her late 40s. I was heading into college. And then in my early 20s, I moved home. She was in later stages of her Alzheimer's disease. I had done some public health studying, went out to the Peace Corps to do some volunteering / avoiding the unknowns of what it meant to care for my mom. And then I became her full-time primary caregiver and hired home health aides and really worked through the process of what it meant to care for her. So have a really high-tech wearable here, but this was something for my mom that represented what she saw, because she had a left brain atrophy. So it meant everything, right brain atrophy. So everything on her left side was like, kind of like this. But if I describe that in words, it takes a lot. If we put on these glasses, we could immediately understand why we had to protect the left side of her body, or like approach her from the right so she would see us and not get startled. Or like at mealtime, she'd eat exactly half of her plate of food, so we would remember to turn it. And so by immersing ourselves in her her perspective, we could do what we call active empathy, translate that into better care for my mom. And today at Embodied Labs, we create immersive live action and game blended environments. We use fully immersive environments as well as browser web-based interactive, no hardware required. And we've been scaling that as a platform for caregivers that were informal like I am, and B2B through partners in government, academia, and senior services.
Thank you. Amazing, Carrie. Joannika?
Yeah. Yes, my name is Janneke, and initially I started doing clinical psychology for my master's, and then I realized that I was missing more of the research part of it, so I switched a little bit, went on to research in behavioral science, and as part of that you have to pick like a research internship, and at that time there was our professor, Isabel Granick, who was standing there with a booth, and she was talking about using games as a way to help kids. And that was, at the time, pretty revolutionary, because most of the time when people talked about video games, it was mostly in a negative sense. So I was very interested in that and thought, oh, this is wonderful, because my brother is very visually impaired, and I saw through him that games really gave him confidence and really helped him a lot. So for him and for me, growing up with him, it was always a very positive experience. So seeing that people were really taking that side seriously and were looking into research in that, I was like immediately captivated by that. So I joined her lab during the research master, which would in the end be called the Games for Emotional and Mental Health Lab, where we were creating different game applications for different mental health issues. And then I was thinking about doing a PhD. And at that time, our professor got connected to the developers of Deep, who just had a very, then it was still in its early stages, it was just a small concept back then. And we were connected through them for a media festival for kids. And we thought, this is such a nice, intuitive way to maybe help kids who have anxiety, because it was breath focused, it was breath controlled. So at a media festival, a small pilot was set up, and then I was still volunteering, like helping with the setting it up. And through that meeting, eventually I decided that I was going to do my PhD in this. And we wrote an application together to build Deep out, to see, can we add some things that we already know from therapy help, and can we see in what way it could be potentially used for anxiety? And so I joined that team, and that is where I am now. And I'm doing a lot with Deep still, but also different playful, interactive projects, and seeing how I can use the inside of behavioral science to help validate that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lindsay?
Well, I always say that I came at building Augment Therapy somewhat by accident. I'm a physical therapist by trade, and I have been working with children in particular and adults with a variety of conditions: cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, autism, adults with musculoskeletal surgeries and conditions. And the pervasive thing that I saw was everyone viewed physical therapy as pain and torture. They were calling me that behind my back. I knew it. And I wanted to change the experience of rehab for my patients. And what really was the catalyst moment was Pokemon Go. I saw this solution and I thought I could use this to motivate children in particular to walk, that were often refusing to walk for me. And I would set it on one side of the room, a variety of ways to encourage a child. And my superiors said that I could not use it in my therapy practice because it was not a vetted therapeutic tool. Well, that made me mad. And so I decided to continue my days at work daydreaming how I would build something with efficacy, with evidence-based exercise, and also leveraging one of the most fundamental tools that clinicians like myself like to use, which is a mirror. we love to use these because they really encourage that brain-body connection. So I was fascinated with turning the world of Pokemon Go outward into inward, and facing the patient and changing the environment around the patient to engage them to move in targeted ways. So that was really my first phase, was taking this idea and trying to build a company that could do it. Phase 2 of my story is in the process of building a prototype, as I'm not a technologist. I just had the vision for how it needed to work for the patient. In the process of building the prototype with who eventually became my co-founder, my own daughter came down with a septic hip infection, which in children, and I never experienced the process of therapy as a parent, which for children in many cases, they have chronic conditions, and so it's often a lifelong process for them. And I knew it was a terrible process, quite honestly, for the parents. But then my own daughter got this septic infection. She was 4 years old at the time. We only had a prototype done of the software, had not tested it with any children. My daughter had emergency hip surgery. We spent a week in the hospital together, and she was probably the worst patient I had ever seen. She was screaming like an animal, and the therapists were using bubbles and stickers to motivate her to get up and exercise, and she basically threw those bubbles and stickers right at them. She's okay today, I can tell you, several years later, but when we got home from the hospital that first day, I thought, all right, I think now's the time. We're going to test it with our first patient. Put the software in front of her, and she immediately responded and did all of the exercises she had been refusing in the hospital setting. And she was getting all the therapeutic benefit of seeing herself on the screen while we were transforming our family room into a snow globe environment that encouraged her to shift her body weight onto her surgical leg. Something happened to me in that moment and on that day. It's like a nuclear explosion. And I have been on a mission, a real passion project ever since. And that's really how Augment Therapy was born.
Amazing to hear the deep personal connection, the mother, the brother, the daughter, that really created the impetus. If you could also both just touch on what continues to keep you there. All three of you are so enormously talented. So when you think of the impact that you want to bring and what your company is doing, anything else that you want to discuss? We'll just go in the opposite order.
For us, we really try to stay very connected with the use cases as they're ongoing. Of course, we're researching the solution in action, but we're used in a variety of children's hospitals across the US. We've just started now in one in Israel as well. And we really encourage the therapists to speak directly with us, and then we share those stories back with our developers. And it's those stories that really catalyze the team, and we'll burn the midnight oil when we hear the stories. There's stories like a patient that was in a sickle cell pain crisis. And so these are patients that typically when they're admitted to the hospital, they will refuse movement altogether, even though movement is often one of the things that will help them leave the hospital and will help them shorten that pain, intense pain that they're feeling in the moment and at that time. So there was a patient that had been refusing to get out of bed for 4 days at that point. They had tried everything to motivate the patient. They wheeled our solution into the room, which really functions as an iPad, and that's then connected to a television. The patient sees their image on the screen, and we then augment their environment. At times, we'll have them embody a character, and they control the character with their body, no sensors on their body. We're just using computer vision. That patient did 30 minutes of exercise in their first out-of-bed episode. I can tell you as a therapist, those kinds of things do not happen. And they did this happily. And again, because going back to the theme of the talk here, we really truly were transforming them from this hospital environment into something that was engaging enough to encourage a patient to overcome that profound pain crisis. And so those are the stories that really get us going and keep us moving forward at all times.
Thanks, Lindsay. Ionica?
Yeah, I think what keeps me going most of the time is working together with people and working on applications that can have a real impact, and that we all know that we can do things differently. That mental health interventions or whatever health interventions, they can and should be more fun and empowering. They should feel more human, which I think a lot of times, especially coming from the research side of things, it was often very a little bit soulless, the things that were created in terms of technological applications. So I think having that balance between art, design, research, healthcare, bringing all of those things together to create beautiful experiences is really what keeps me going. And knowing that that is the way forward and that is the way that it should be going. Yeah, and then in that way, hoping that we can make lives better.
Mm-hmm. Carrie?
Yeah, great question. So I think 18 years to one is the years of startup to 1 year of human life, if we do a ratio. So, and then Embodied Labs is about to hit 7 years in July, and so we all know like the 7-year time. So this is a really timely question. I think like impact and scale are really motivating to me personally as like a founder of this company. And being able to build with my team and see that team grow and build this company and like what that means to, I love the people part, the team, who we impact, our customers outward. I think what keeps me going is that this intersection of immersive technology, is it ready for scale? Healthcare specifically, like aging, is that interesting to venture capital? Is there a scale-up market there? And then caregiving, all of those are nascent, and they're all overlapping for where we are situated. I think really trying to understand, one, is there like just a business here that can survive on some fundamentals? And then two is like, can we get that business to scale the way we've all been dreaming since the Unity Vision Summit when we got our headset and we developed on it. Thank goodness. Thank you, HTC. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. It is, yeah, it's a long journey. I'm curious, all of you do not come from technology backgrounds, and so you bring to this work really unique expertise. What have you upskilled on yourselves with a whole team of creators here? What have you learned yourselves? And then what have you actually deliberately decided to not learn and make sure you're hiring and bringing into the organization?
I'll start. Well, one of the things that's unique about me as a clinician is I really am obsessed with the end game, the end consumer experience, the patient experience, the provider experience, which is ultimately who we are selling to. And that's not normally someone like me is sitting at the helm of the tech company driving that. And so that has really positioned the company very uniquely because we are truly obsessed with the ultimate end customer experience. And I would say, for example, my co-founder has said, because I don't necessarily understand fully how the technology and the limitations of the technology work, I just know how it has to function for the patient. He says that it's a breath of fresh air when trying to get the vision out of my brain and into reality for the technology. I'm not limited by what my knowledge is of how technology works or functions, what's hard, what's easy. That being said, I have tried to level up constantly. So, and at the very beginning, we're talking a hardcore level up was needed because my first pitch deck that I had to create, I'm a physical therapist. We typically work with our hands. I had never worked with PowerPoint before. My 12-year-old son had to teach me how to use PowerPoint for my first presentation. So we're talking a lot of leveling up needed to happen. I bought books on how to build a business for dummies. So that was 6.5 years ago. I now can converse on a technological level fairly fluently to some degree. But I try to always also maintain and recognize that I don't know everything. And I absolutely have to surround myself with people that absolutely are fluent in that, and that I will never be that. And I never try to be either. So that's my philosophy.
Sounds like a great relationship with your co-founder too,
Yes.
that they really value your ability to imagine whatever is possible,
Right.
And don't try and constrain you in that.
I think what worked for us a lot is that in the team where we're working with scientists, programmers, artists, that you don't really try to take over someone else's role, but at least you wear their shoes for a while. And throughout the entire process, that's what we've done a lot of the time. So for instance, very early on, the developers and the artists would come to like scientific conferences with me, or do it themselves at some point. Or I would go to game conferences and I'd be there demoing the stuff. So I knew what that environment was like and I knew what people were talking about. And I think it helped a little bit that I liked games already. So that gave me a little bit more of an in, I would say. But that gave us, or at least like inhabiting each other's spaces occasionally, gave us a bit more insight in the other person's world, but then keeping enough like respect for each other's role to know, okay, this is the boundary where I shouldn't pretend to be the designer or the programmer too much. Just enough to like still respect each other's expertise and respect each other's roles, but not being afraid to like go outside of your comfort zone a little bit. And I think where I've starting to level up the most in currently is more in the business side of things. I never, that's not where I ever wanted to do or thought I would be doing, because I was science, health, every time in research we were talking about business, there it would be like, okay, but that's so commercial, it's about money, we're doing it for the people and for knowledge and for impact. But now I also know that you need that business side to make an impact. That's where I'm leveling up the most at the moment. Yeah.
And wearing each other's shoes.
Yeah.
That's a great strategy. Carrie?
Yeah, a lot of what you both said resonates. I think working myself out of a job, the many shoes, is like, how much can I get out of this and find someone that thrives on this aspect of the business. Definitely resonate with the business side. So like when we founded the company, I would have thought like I'm gonna be like on the product, kind of in love with that. That's not what happened. I was like, you guys can't give me a CEO. Like I can't be a CEO. And I was like, no, not it. So today, like we've raised a seed, and I've done like hundreds of pitches to venture capitalists to get there. So like I've leveled up in like my body language, which is like a Harvard proven study that if you mirror the people that you're pitching to, they will be more likely to fund you, since 98% of the capital in venture goes to white males, which I had no idea about when we jumped off this. I didn't know about the stats when I got into this. It's like anyone who's getting into that stat is real. But yeah, I think financing the company is a role. Like just, I learned all about debt financing recently. Needed it right around the time SVB closed this year for a very large contract that we're ramping for. So I love financing, and I love being a CEO and building a team. I'm really challenged by managing people, so I've leveled that up some, but I really am looking forward to continuing to hire people into those shoes who do it, know it, love it, and I can learn from. So.
A lot of risk taking. Congratulations to all of you. Yeah, getting out of your comfort zone, and great teams, it sounds like, as well. Switching gears a little bit, I'm curious, especially in this field, the importance of research is critical. So I'm curious how you handle user research, also independent, kind of third-party research, and what your strategy is there to conserve costs but get the impact you need. Anybody feel free to jump in.
Well, for us, we really, the time for research began for us just before the pandemic hit. And so we had our first feasibility study ongoing in a pediatric intensive care, inpatient and outpatient environment, which was already a difficult threshold to hit to begin driving research in that market and in that market segment. And so we were very excited, and then the pandemic hit, and it really changed everything for how we were trying to go at furthering our research when already the medical professionals were burnt out, inundated, overwhelmed, and how do we ask them, in addition, to drive some vital research that's needed to move my business forward. That was a very difficult thing for us. It's still difficult. We did manage to get other research ongoing with partnering with educational institutions and then also their hospital counterpart. So we have really strived for evidence at all times. But it remains a challenge for us, and we're now seeing a real wave of things lifting and starting to lighten up, and more of an embrace to move technology or research forward. Now that many of the precautions and the restrictions are lifting, so it has been a challenge for us. I can't understate that.
Yeah, I think our research really changed a lot. And when we were starting when I got on board in like 2016, it was all very new. Like, how do you, us coming from like a classical behavioral science background, like merge this more fast iterative cycle that is usually needed for development and design with usually what then was a bit more slower research. And we have had many conversations with the developers of how do we do this, because we thought, okay, at some point we have to then pause the development, and then because we can't change anything about the application, otherwise we can't know what the effects are if we change too much. But then they wanted this fast iteration because they wanted to have the feedback. So how do we combine that more classical behavioral science design with more play testing and user testing? Those were two worlds coming together with very different timelines. And because back then, if you wanted to have, well, I guess it's still in many ways the case that if you want to have some sort of intervention that can be used for health, what you do is usually run a very big randomized controlled trial where you compare it to like a golden standard of something that was already out there. But that's more of like an end stage, and there's so much needs to happen before that to know, okay, what elements do we want to put in? Are these elements that we're putting in right now more effective than others? And so yeah, we've moved a bit like back and forth between a bit more user testing, smaller scale, play testing, and then eventually going into more efficacy trials. And initially it was also a smaller team, but now when we got to a point where, okay, we had some evidence where we could show, hey, we ran the randomized control trial for anxiety, and now we're moving on to different fields, and we're letting other research labs take over, and anyone who has interest in this can go and see, hey, what else can it be used for? And they bring also different knowledge and different like designs and different methods. And yeah, I think really that's merging between like classic behavioral like health science with more play testing, user experience testing, finding the right balance between those. We're still continuing to find that.
Carrie, what about you?
Yeah, I think two main buckets. So I think co-creation is a good word for both, but when we build, so Embody Labs builds shared immersive experiences, and then we also have the platform of how that library we're building is accessed by our customers. So when we build a shared immersive experience, there's a process for that where we're building through the eyes of someone, and we're showing what it looks like to embody a health condition, a healthcare transition, a cultural aspect of care. So our pre-production phase of that requires us to bring those voices, those people, to design the interactive script and storyboard and experience. So it's clinicians, it's patients, it's caregivers, and then at times those people have been parts of creating the actual production. We've done things like embed our research team in a hospice for a week so that they can really understand the end of life journey before they go and build that immersive experience. So that's in like the immersive experience creation side. What we started doing was co-creating with our customers too. So like last year, the Adult Protective Services Training Division for a third of California wanted to design, they've been a customer for years, and they're like, you know what, we need more home visits where we can give our caseworkers a place to practice clinical assessments and risk assessments, going into different kinds of homes where it's dangerous. That became now available to our 1/3 of our subscribers in academia, now training their social workers with that. So we're building this, co-creating this library with the customer's business case, their subject matter expertise on board, and then I think driving that out into our customer, our three main buckets. Academia is publishing peer-reviewed literature on how does immersive learning look in nursing, medicine, physical, in the classroom, out of the classroom, more of the very academic kind of questions that have become people's PhD research. In the government side, we've worked with the VA at the national level, and they did an evidence-based study there. Then have also, with our most recent work we're doing to scale in California with the California Department of Aging, they've paired their overall project with UCSF, but we also have partnered with a couple universities, Denver University is one in particular, where now we're starting to add into, we've built the product with customizable, flexible tools so that any customer who wants to do research can do that. And we're using those same tools now with these academic partners as we bring Embody Labs to 100,000 informal caregivers in California, 5,000 direct care workers, to say, what is that validated scale that can start to show with a high enough power of users how this is, in our case, is decreasing caregiver burnout or looking at caregiver competency. So those are a few examples.
Yeah, amazing. So partnering with academia, government, hospitals to really offset the cost and get the talent to provide the efficacy that you need. Carrie, I'm going to pick up on your last comment about scale. So can each of you talk more about how you're thinking about scale and impact for your business as you go forward? I'll start with you, Carrie.
Yeah, so scale is tough and immersive. I think I love the continuum of what immersive means. And so not thinking about the hardware, but just what are the tools we have, and how does mixing something from AR to not AR or VR, just it's a toolbox, it's a continuum. And so for us, when we closed our first round of investment, it was January 7th, 2020. And we on the thesis, we were going to scale up VR on site for enterprise healthcare training. So we evolved to look at things like web immersive and other modalities of how do you deliver this where you aren't required to wear a headset necessarily, where you aren't required to be in real life one-to-one. So we're one-to-many models. how are immersive experiences shared? How do you input to those with different ways of input? Maybe I have the headset on, but you're in the room. Maybe you have the headset on and home, and you're sharing with 300 students that are on Zoom, and there's ways to link immersive that can scale now. And I think by understanding kind of how to solve for business problems that are large, like Alzheimer's and aging being some of the largest things we're facing as a population, we can look at business markets that can support that kind of model at scale. That's a really great question, and I am gonna just pause there.
Yeah, I think scaling is also, it's complicated. It's pretty difficult because we started out from this, of course, smaller team, and we have a lot of different partners in different hospital settings, research settings, different labs where we've shown that it's useful and that they're using it. But then, how do you get to that next step, and what do you focus on? Particularly also with, even though, because it's a VR application, right? You want it to be as accessible to as many people as possible. And how do you do that? Of course, it's getting more and more accessible as we go, but still not everyone can just afford to have that. So how can we work in a way that it can serve as many people as possible? Like, maybe you can use the VR set when you're in a therapist's office, but then maybe there could be a rental system, or there's a companion app where you can initially go through the therapy with the headset, but then take some of it home with you. Like, all of those smaller things, like how can we make sure that it's being used in many different ways, or even more unconventional routes where we thought about, okay, well, maybe in more public spaces that you can put versions of it there. We have, for instance, a version of Deep in the Nemo Science Museum, which is a kids museum, where it's not in VR, but it still has the same breath-based movement. It's a screen, and it's on a smaller scale, like sending this message of, hey, this type of breathing, if you're feeling tense, if you're feeling stressed, might help you. And it's like a different kind of impact, but it will reach a lot of people. So yeah, where do you go? What route do you take? And what market and which users do you focus on the most? Because of course, the team that we work with are usually also the game developers. So do you go more for the game angle, or do you focus more on healthcare? So yeah, there's all different types of questions that have been floating around over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think just like Carrie and Ioannika, we haven't figured out the scale challenges either. And for us, the challenges that we had out of the gate were even greater in that we chose for our initial target market pediatrics, which in healthcare is like a big no-no, and everyone thinks that that's too small of a market, it's too challenging. There's no investors that are interested in investing in pediatrics. And what we found is, sure, there are stereotypes that, yes, there are investors that, closed the door the second we said we were focusing on pediatrics, but there was also a wide opportunity there because 20% of all hospital beds in the US are actually held by children. 1 in 5 children in the US right now has obesity, 1 in 6 have disabilities. These are enormous numbers. And by building a solution that was accessible for children, many of which have chronic disabilities, it positioned us very well for the adult market. And by building for children first, it made it far easier for us to then expand into the adult market, which was the opposite of what most healthcare investors and VCs of that sort would suggest that we do. And that has been the case. And in the process, as we begin to explore more and more options for scale, we've now attracted the attention of the payers, which is what all healthcare, digital health companies want to get to. And those payers are very focused on the markets that the investors maybe are telling you to overlook. And these chronic disabled patients cost them the most out of all of their patients. So these strategies that we implemented at first have positioned us well for scale. We think, of course, who knows what will come our way, but that is the direction that we're headed. Is we're beginning to explore more partnerships with payers, and we're expanding into the adult market, and really age agnostic, but we do definitely tend to shine more with those patients with chronic conditions. Whereas most digital health companies in the musculoskeletal space like us are focusing on typical adults with short episodes of care. So the way we have really embedded our technology is positioned us well to solve those problems, and that's where we're focusing our energy for our scale going forward.
Really fascinating model to start with the harder market,
Yeah.
and then move into the easier.
And again, to offer up my ignorance really is what started that, which is ultimately a benefit to some degree. Is you march through doors you don't know are there, and that is really why we started that way. I didn't know any better.
I hope you keep some part of that. So 2 more questions before we open it up to the group for questions. What are some of the ethical or legal implications that you've run into, and how have you tried to solve them?
I think the big one that we are exploring right now is medical device regulation. So we are, because usually now we're switching more to hospital settings, and it's actually quite difficult because we want to have some initial user experience there, not even doing it as an intervention yet, but just some initial feedback, also talking with the clinicians. But a lot of doors are immediately shut if you don't have that medical device regulation yet. So that is really something that we need to focus on. I think it's of course also important that we do that, but the process is just it's just very complicated, where it's kind of just slowing down so much. And so we're really trying to find the best way to go about that at this moment.
For us, initially with starting off in the pediatric market, we of course had incredibly stringent ethical and legal barriers that we had to cross. And so one of the ones is obviously children's privacy and capturing images and video of children. We have chosen within our design is we don't actually store any videos or images of the children. Even though the child sees themselves on the screen, the data that we're capturing is on their movement. It's objective data, and it's not image related. But those were very high barriers, and obviously when you get into the hospital setting and the providers, that only complicates the matter. Then on top of that are the challenges of data as well in the healthcare setting. So many of these entities all say they own the data for that patient, least of which they're considering is the patient owning their data. But those are barriers as well that we continue to face. And we're forging through them, but there's not many paths to follow at this stage of things as well. So we're blazing a trail on many of these issues, but I think so far, all of these entities, payers, hospitals are now at this deep realization that there is no way to avoid it. They must embrace it if they will continue to meet their patients in any setting at any time. Really back to Ori's keynote speech that is their objective, and that digital health and technology is going to be the only way they can truly do that. So they are learning to meet these ethical and legal challenges because they're inevitable.
Carrie, anything to add?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of things like in the healthcare space. I think data is different, like looking at kind of the use cases around like the hardware of immersive and having like a consumer-facing, more gaming-oriented company having one of the leading, more easy-to-access headsets also lends itself to enterprise healthcare customers to say, well, who owns this? Who owns this data? Where's this data going? What's even being collected? Voice is a biometric, considered a biometric in some states, others not. Things are not considered biometrics yet that will be. So I think all of that can be kind of daunting as like thinking about from the risk side of like, oh man, down the road, if this is scaling, like what risk it could open up. It's like kind of one way to, that's a very risk-oriented way to approach. That wasn't very optimistic, but
realistic.
But I think that's also why it's important to have people in the space that are healthcare experts building this technology, because it really supports how we best make all of these big ethical decisions that aren't even yet uncovered together, the right voices around the table to co-create. And then I had one other piece on the ethics side, but I just blanked, so I'm gonna leave it there.
If you think about it again, let us know.
Yeah.
So last question. The next few years, I won't even say 5 to 10 years, the next few years are incredibly exciting as we look at the evolution of AI and additional wearables or headsets, whatever we want to call them. How are you thinking through the broader impact you can make with the evolution of technology?
I remembered what I was going to say because you reminded me. Some of the things that have come up with are accessibility. So like, how do you make this accessible to someone who's blind, who can't hear? How do you make this available in multiple languages? And how do you situate? So I think about those things for scale. Those are all really great ethical questions and critical questions, but I'm excited for really being able to cross the chasm of why immersive through some of these quality cases, business cases for better quality outcomes in care that say, by doing it through these modalities, we're outpacing anything else that's incumbent, and maybe even seeing. I'm really excited about how non-traditional healthcare providers are coming into market to, like the CVS's, the Best Buys. You guys have better examples than me probably, but like, how are we interfacing as like we're kind of building that bridge of virtual to open up better ways for us to like spend our human time together. So I think like immersive things like what we're building are going to, at scale, enable all of us to have like better real human connections in the things that can't be done by ChatGPT at the masses or otherwise.
Yeah, I agree with a lot with what you're saying. Like I'm especially a lot excited about things becoming hopefully more accessible, more intuitive in terms of the controls, having the opportunity to get more impact, broader impact. I'm just especially like because from where we started with like a little belt that measured the diaphragm that was just made in the main developer's backyard, like himself putting it together, to maybe something that can just very easily detect breathing or anything that can just make it more easier and more accessible for people to try it at home, try it with their caregivers, with their family. Anything that can make things more accessible is exciting to me.
I'm most excited about also breaking the barriers for the providers, and I think the future is going to be, I feel like the consumers are ready, the patients at large are ready. Providers still are struggling, no question. Their workflows are absolutely incredibly arduous, and how do you find time in there to incorporate immersive technology? But the opportunities there are so profound, and the best example I can give you is the norms of how I traditionally deliver care for a patient, let's say with cerebral palsy, is I tell that patient's family, I say, you must bring your child to me 2 to 3 times a week for years on end. And the parents invariably stare back at me with shock, and I say, if your child is going to walk or run or climb stairs, this is the model you must adhere to. And then I also operate under the assumption that the exercise programs I prescribe will not be adhered to outside of the time that I am physically with a patient. This is what immersive technology is going to unlock. It is going to change these families' lives. They don't have to physically come to me, and I can physically or virtually engage with that patient in their ideal environment. I can monitor what's going on, and this is going to change that trajectory of care from 20 years to 10 years. It's so exciting to me, and I think the providers are the ones that really need to get on board, and once they do, I think the future of healthcare is truly going to change, and then it's going to change people's lives in the process.
Really exciting. Thank you all.
We have about 5 minutes for questions, so if you want to come up here, that would be great. She's
Just
first.
a shout out to
She's
Tess.
first.
For those of
Sorry.
you who don't know Tess, she has a list of like 150 healthcare immersive experiences. So if you want more additions to her, go ahead.
Awesome. Well, this was a great panel. I'm Caitlin Krause, MindWise, doing research on wonder and awe at Stanford. Britton Heller has research too about biometric psychography. So you were inspiring me to see the layers of our reactions. My question is more about individual versus groups. If you have any preference for what you see as a future of healthcare with maybe shared experiences in metaverse versus people on their own as solo, what are the pros and cons, and what do you prefer?
In 1 minute or less.
Sorry, in 1 minute or less.
Group.
I see a lot in shared experiences, just because also knowing just you're not alone, other people go through this as well, like healing together, and yeah, going from more from this individual thing to, hey, we all are dealing with things and we can all heal together, I think is very powerful.
Yeah.
Agreed. Patients with cancer that use our solution, often these patients' bone marrow transplants, they can't leave their hospital room for months on end because they're so immunocompromised. How do you as a therapist go in and engage that patient to move in a 10 by 10 space? Immersive tech is going to change that, and absolutely a shared experience with someone else that's experiencing the same thing, a family member in a remote location, is going to change that for that patient.
I think it's like email and internet for communication is like immersive experience for physical, like you said it so well, for physical space. So like the crux of them are shared. I think we've just started at the tip of the iceberg on actually sharing them, but like that is the future.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michael Robbins with Learning Pathmakers. Jessica, good to see you. I think it's been a while. I'm interested in what you think or are seeing about the use of immersive XR as alternative to psychedelics and other controlled substances for the treatment of PTSD, depression, etc.
Yeah, I'm actually interested in the combination of
I was
them.
going to say and.
Yeah.
And versus or.
Both
Yeah,
and.
I'm very excited to see how that looks like. That is, I mean, that's for most things, also for looking for traditional therapy and like digital therapy, but like why not both? Why not merge them together? Why not have it as an addition? So yeah, initially my reaction would be, why not both?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tommy Tron from Great Lakes Real Labs. One of the projects that we're working on are games to teach independent living skills to special needs students. And I was curious from your experiences in the product design conversations that you had with stakeholders and subject matter experts. Have you found any difficulties with navigating the concept of fun versus a tool? And how have you navigated those conversations?
the money conversation. This is always one of my toughest because my angle of thinking is typically outcomes oriented. So it has been a muscle I've had to learn how to build and flex, but the ROI story is there, absolutely. And it's just a matter of finding it. So absolutely, if you can find a path to the money and how it's saving money or making money, you will be able to win any of those conversations, but the research is there to support it. Just it's unique for them to be connected through XR, and so people oftentimes don't understand how that money story can be told, but it is there. Don't give up.
Excellent. Thank you.
So thank you to the panelists, and thank you so much for coming, and our next presenter will be in about 5 minutes.
Thank you, everyone.